The stars out near the galactic neutral zone were quiet that evening. They were always quiet there. No trade ships passed through. No colony vessels. No one had a reason to be that far out on the edge of monitored space. No one except border patrol units and the occasional scout from one of the 6 races that made up the Galactic Coalition. Admiral Vorath of the Velhari had been sitting in his command chair for 3 hours when the alert came in. It was not a loud alert. It was not the kind that made his bridge crew jump from their seats or reach for weapons. It was a soft chime, the kind reserved for unregistered vessels crossing into Coalition-monitored space. It happened maybe twice a month. Usually it was a lost cargo hauler or a survey ship that had drifted off course. Vorath did not stand. He simply looked at his sensor officer, a tall insectoid named Churex, and waited. Churex pulled the data onto her screen. She read it once. Then she read it again. Her 4 thin fingers hovered over the console without pressing anything. The vessel was human. It bore the designation Iron Resolve, and it was traveling at a calm, steady pace. Not running, not hiding, not acting in any way like a ship that knew it was being watched. Its heading was straight and unhurried. Its energy output was stable. From a distance, it looked like a ship on a routine patrol, which is exactly what it was. Vorath ordered a standard diplomatic scan. This was the normal procedure. A scan would tell them the vessel's registration, its crew count, its weapon class, its hull rating. It would take about 40 seconds. Then they would send a polite message asking the crew to reroute and file a corrected flight path, and that would be the end of it. Churex began the scan. 30 seconds passed. 40. 60. Vorath noticed that Churex had not moved. She was standing completely still, staring at her screen the way someone stares at a thing they are not sure they are really seeing. Her antennae, which normally shifted and tilted with the small rhythms of her focus, had gone flat against her head. He said her name. She did not respond. He said it again, this time with the tone that officers use when they need a reply immediately. Churex turned her head slowly. Her large compound eyes caught the light of the console. She said, very quietly, that the scan results must be corrupted. She asked for permission to run a second scan. Vorath told her yes. On the other side of the border, inside the Iron Resolve, Captain Leon Drake was sitting in the ship's small dining area eating a late meal. He was 42 years old, broad through the shoulders, with a calm face that had not changed much since his academy days. He was from Kansas City. He had been in deep space for 11 months of this current tour, and he was thinking, not for the first time, about whether the kitchen staff could do anything interesting with the ration packs they had left. His first officer, Lieutenant Commander Diane Foster, was at her station running crew rotation schedules. She was 35, from Nashville, sharp-eyed and efficient. She had served with Leon for 2 years and trusted his judgment completely, mostly because he had never once given her a reason not to. The Iron Resolve carried 847 men and women. They were going about the ordinary business of a patrol ship: maintenance checks, shift rotations, equipment calibrations, quiet conversations in corridors. None of them knew they were being scanned. Back on the Coalition bridge, Churex finished the second scan. Then, without being asked, she ran a third. All 3 returned identical results. She stood very still for a moment. Then she said, in a voice that was barely above a whisper, that she needed Vorath to come look at her screen. He got up from his chair. He walked across the bridge. He stood beside her and looked at what the scanner had found. The bridge of the Coalition vessel went very quiet after that. Not the quiet of boredom or routine. The quiet of people who have just seen something that does not fit into any category they were prepared for. Vorath read the data once. Then he clasped his hands behind his back, stared at the screen, and said nothing for a long time. Out in the dark, the Iron Resolve continued on its heading, steady and calm, its running lights blinking at even intervals, its crew completely unaware that somewhere nearby, a room full of aliens had just stopped breathing normally. The Coalition scanner was not a simple machine. It did not just count guns or measure hull thickness. It was one of the most advanced pieces of technology the 6-Race Alliance had ever built together, a project that had taken 14 years and the combined scientific knowledge of species that had been traveling between stars for centuries. It read everything: hull composition, energy output, internal temperature, weapon configuration, biological data on every living crew member. psychological pattern indicators drawn from communication logs, historical combat records stored in the ship's onboard computer, physical stress responses. It could, in theory, tell you more about a vessel and its crew than the crew knew about themselves. Churex had run it 3 times. She had the results in front of her. She did not want to read them aloud, so she transferred them to the main screen so that Vorith could read them himself. The first thing the scanner reported was the hull. The iron resolve was made of a layered composite material that the Coalition had never catalogued before. This was not because it was exotic or alien in origin. It was because it was so heavily over-engineered that it fell outside any category the scanner had a reference for. The hull could absorb energy blasts that were rated for capital-class destroyers, the largest warships any Coalition species operated. And yet by human classification, the Iron Resolve was a mid-range patrol cruiser. Not a capital ship. Not even close to one. Just a patrol cruiser. The kind humans sent out by the hundreds. Vorith read that part twice. The second thing was the weapons array. The Iron Resolve carried 14 distinct weapon systems. 7 of them had no direct parallel in Coalition records. 3 of those 7 operated on principles that Coalition scientists had theorized in papers but had not yet managed to actually build. The scanner had identified the energy signatures and cross-referenced them against every known weapons database the Coalition had. It found partial matches at best. Churex had flagged 2 of the unknown systems with a special marker, not because they were the most powerful, but because of what they appeared to be designed to do. They were not built to destroy ships. They were built to unmake them at a level so small it was almost difficult to think about clearly. The third thing was the crew data. 847 humans. Average sleep cycle, 6.2 hours. This was already remarkable, since every Coalition species required between 9 and 12 hours of rest to maintain full cognitive function. But that was not the part that made Churex go still. The scanner had pulled trace biological markers from the ship's internal atmosphere, the kind of data left behind by bodies under stress. And what it found did not make sense to her at first, because it was the opposite of what she expected. When Velhari experienced stress, when they were afraid, or under pressure, or in danger, their bodies slowed down. Their reflexes became more careful. Their senses narrowed. Their decision-making turned cautious and conservative. This was true of every Coalition species. It was, as far as the Coalition's biologists had ever known, the universal response to threat. The body protects itself by slowing down and thinking before acting. Humans did the opposite. Under stress, the human body released compounds that increased reflex speed, sharpened visual processing, raised pain tolerance significantly, made them faster, more focused, and harder to stop. The scanner had picked up residual trace amounts from 11 recorded engagements stored in the ship's combat log. In every single one of those engagements, the crew's biological stress response had made them perform better, not worse. Churex had stared at that data for a long time before she accepted that it was not a scan error. The fourth thing was the combat record. The Iron Resolve was 4 years old. In those 4 years, it had been involved in 11 armed engagements. It had never been boarded. It had never been disabled. It had a confirmed record of 23 hostile vessels destroyed or rendered inoperable across those 11 encounters. And at the bottom of that record, in plain text, was a crew casualty number. 0. Not one crew member lost across 11 engagements and 23 destroyed vessels. Vorith stood in front of the screen for a while after reading that. Behind him, his weapons officer Grawl and diplomat attaché Selwyn had come to read over his shoulder. No one said anything. Then Churex added one last detail, almost as an afterthought. She said that according to the ship's internal logs, at the moment the scan was being conducted, Captain Leon Drake was on his meal break. His location was listed as the ship's dining area. His status showed no elevated stress indicators at all. He was eating. He had no idea any of this was happening. Grawl made a low sound in the back of his throat. Selwyn pressed 2 fingers against her temple the way she always did when she was processing something difficult. Vorith clasped his hands behind his back again and stared at the 0 at the bottom of the casualty list for a long, quiet moment. Outside, the Iron Resolve kept moving through the dark, steady and calm, its running lights blinking like a heartbeat that did not know it was being watched. Vorath called the meeting in the side room off the main bridge. It was a small room with a round table and 6 chairs, the kind of room used for quiet conversations, not grand strategy sessions. He wanted it that way. He did not want the rest of the crew to hear what was about to be discussed. He brought Churex, Graal, and Selwyn. He closed the door. Outside, the Iron Resolve continued on its slow, unhurried course. It had not changed speed. It had not changed heading. It did not know it was being discussed. Vorath placed the scan summary on the table and told them to say what they thought. Graal spoke first. He was always the one to speak first. He was a heavy-set amphibian from the Duran homeworlds, with thick gray skin and small dark eyes that sat deep in his face. He had been a weapons officer for 20 years, and he thought about every problem in terms of what it could do to you if you did not deal with it first. He said the scan data made it clear that the human vessel was a threat. Not a potential threat. Not a theoretical one. A real and present one. It had an armament that the Coalition could not fully identify. It had a hull that could take hits meant for capital ships. Its crew became more dangerous when they were scared. And it had been in 11 fights and never lost a single person. Graal said that these facts, taken together, meant one thing. The Coalition was looking at a weapon, not a ship. He said they should act now, while the element of surprise was still with them, before the humans knew they were being watched. No one spoke for a moment after that. Then Selwyn said, very calmly, that Graal had missed the most important part of the data. Selwyn was a Velhari female assigned to Coalition diplomatic work. She was lean and precise, and she had spent 30 years learning how to say difficult things without making people feel attacked. She placed one finger on the scan summary and said, "The Iron Resolve is one ship. If one mid-range human patrol cruiser looks like this, hull, weapons, crew, combat record, then what does the rest of the human fleet look like?" She said that acting aggressively against a single vessel in open space, without provocation, without warning, and without knowing what response it would trigger, was not strategy. It was panic. And panic, she said, had ended more civilizations than war had. Graal said they could not just let it pass. Selwyn said they absolutely could, and that they should also open a formal communication channel immediately so that the humans knew their border crossing had been noticed and that the Coalition was a polite neighbor rather than a nervous one. They both looked at Vorath. Churex raised one thin arm and said she had found something else while the others were talking. She had continued pulling data from open human defense publications during the meeting, documents that humans themselves had made available through diplomatic exchange channels. She had cross-referenced the Iron Resolve specifications against the public classification records of the human space fleet. She put her findings on the table. The Iron Resolve was not a flagship. It was not an elite vessel. It was not a prototype or a special unit sent to the border to make a statement. By human military classification, it was a standard patrol cruiser, the kind humans built in large batches and sent out in groups to cover the routine borders of their space. The classification document listed it as a Tier 3 unit. There were, according to the public records, over 400 vessels of the same class currently in service. The room went quiet. Graal stared at the number. His jaw moved once, as if he was about to say something, and then did not. 400. 400 ships, each one capable of what the Iron Resolve was capable of, and humans called this their standard patrol tier. Selwyn closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, she looked at Vorath and said, very quietly, that she would like to revise her earlier recommendation. She no longer thought they should open a communication channel to seem polite. She thought they should open a communication channel because it was the only reasonable thing a sensible species could do when they realized they had accidentally wandered into the territory of something they had deeply underestimated. Vorath stood up from his chair. He had been in the Velhari fleet for 31 years. He had handled first-contact situations, border disputes, arms negotiations, and 2 small wars. He had never, in any of those 31 years, felt the particular kind of stillness that was in this room right now. He told Churex to open a standard hailing channel to the Iron Resolve. He told Graal to stand down all weapon systems and make sure nothing on this ship looked like a threat. He told Selwyn to stand beside him when the communication opened, because he wanted the humans to see a diplomat at his side. Then he straightened his uniform, walked back out onto the bridge, and sat in his command chair. Across the dark, the Iron Resolve's running lights blinked steadily. Somewhere inside it, a man from Kansas City was finishing his dinner and thinking about nothing in particular. Vorath told his communications officer to send the hail. The hail came through on the bridge of the Iron Resolve with a soft two-tone chime that meant an incoming signal from an external vessel. Diane Foster looked up from her rotation schedule, saw the origin code, and spent about 2 full seconds being surprised before she walked to the captain's comm and pressed the intercom button. She told Leon there was an incoming hail from a coalition vessel sitting about 30,000 kilometers off their port side. Leon set down his coffee and was on the bridge in under 2 minutes. He was still tucking in his collar as he came through the door. He glanced at the navigation display, saw the coalition ship's position, and asked Diane if it had been there long. She told him their passive sensors had picked it up about 8 minutes ago, but that it had not moved and had not powered any active systems. It had just been sitting there. Leon said to put the hail through. The screen opened. Vorath had prepared an opening statement. He had spent the last 4 minutes in his command chair thinking carefully about the right tone, formal but not cold, authoritative but not aggressive, the kind of measured first words that set the correct foundation for an exchange between two species who were not quite sure what the other one was going to do. He forgot all of it when he saw Leon. The human was not what Vorath had expected, though he could not have said exactly what he had expected. Leon Drake was broad-shouldered and sat slightly forward in his chair with the easy posture of someone who was comfortable in it. His uniform was dark, fitted, clean. He had a small scar above his left eyebrow that Vorath noticed immediately because the Velhari eye was drawn to asymmetry. His expression was open and calm and carried just a trace of the particular kind of tiredness that came not from fear or stress but from a long deployment and not enough sleep. He looked, in short, like a man who had been interrupted during his meal break and had come to handle something routine. He said, "Admiral, this is an unexpected pleasure. Can we help you with something?" Vorath said yes, and that he hoped the communication was not an imposition. Leon said it was no imposition at all. Vorath asked, carefully, why a human warship was crossing through coalition-monitored space without prior notification. Leon turned his head slightly and looked at Diane. She pulled up the navigation log and walked him through it in about 15 seconds. He turned back to the screen and explained that their standard patrol route had been adjusted 6 days ago to avoid a debris field. The adjustment had brought them briefly into coalition space. It had been a clerical oversight. His navigation officer, Petty Officer 2nd Class Kevin Shaw, 26 years old, from Portland, had filed the original route but had not submitted a corrected version when the heading changed. Leon apologized for that directly and said it would not happen again. Vorath said he appreciated the explanation. There was a short pause. Selwyn stood just off-screen to Vorath's right, watching Leon's face carefully. Vorath asked how long the Iron Resolve had been on active deployment. Leon said 11 months on this current tour. Vorath asked how many armed engagements the ship had been involved in during its full service life. Leon paused. It was a genuine pause, not a careful one, the kind a person makes when they are trying to accurately remember a number rather than deciding how much to share. He glanced at Diane again. She said 11. He confirmed it. Vorath folded his hands on the arm of his chair and asked, as evenly as he could manage, whether Captain Drake considered 11 engagements over 4 years to be a high number. Leon thought about it. He took a slow breath and looked slightly upward the way people do when they are doing a mental comparison. Then he said, "No, Admiral. Honestly, we have had quieter tours than this one." On the coalition bridge, Selwyn pressed 2 fingers against her temple. Grawl, standing near the weapons station with all systems fully powered down as ordered, made a very small sound. Churex wrote something in her personal log. Vorath kept his face exactly as it was and thanked the captain for his time. He said he wished the Iron Resolve safe travels and that he hoped the corrected route would be filed at the crew's earliest convenience. Leon smiled slightly and said they would get it done before the shift change. He asked, in the same easy tone he had used for the entire conversation, whether there was anything the Iron Resolve could help with before they resumed course. He said it the way a neighbor asks if you need a hand with something on your way out, genuine, offhand, completely without any sense that the offer might carry weight. Vorath said no. He meant, "Please go." He meant it with great sincerity. Leon nodded, said it was good to meet him, and signed off. The screen went dark. No one on the coalition bridge spoke for a while. Then Grawl said, very quietly, that the man had offered to help them. Selwyn said yes. Grawl said he had meant it. Selwyn said she knew. Voreth stood up slowly from his chair, walked to the viewport, and looked out at the place where the Iron Resolve had been sitting. Its engines had already flared blue-white, and it was pulling away, resuming its heading with the same calm it had carried the whole time. He watched it until it was too small to see clearly. The Iron Resolve was gone within the hour. Its engines left a faint residual trace on the long-range sensors that faded slowly, and then it was just open space again, quiet and empty and exactly as it had been before. Voreth did not speak to anyone for a while after the communication ended. He sat in his command chair and looked at the viewport and let the bridge crew do their work around him in silence. They were good at reading him. They knew when to leave him alone. After some time he went to his private office, closed the door, and started writing. The report took him most of the night. When he was finished it was 44 pages long, which was unusual for a border encounter report. The standard length was 4 to 6 pages. He read it back to himself once, made 3 small corrections, and then filed it at the highest security classification the Coalition system allowed. He did not classify it because it contained dangerous technical intelligence, though it did contain some of that. He classified it because he had a feeling, sitting alone in his office at the end of a very long day, that the conclusions he had written down were the kind of conclusions that could do real harm if they circulated too widely too fast. Not because they were false, because they were true. The report reached the Coalition High Council 3 days later. They read it in full session, which was not standard procedure for border encounter reports, but which the Council's senior secretary had recommended after reading the first 12 pages herself. Voreth's report covered everything the scan had found. The hull, the weapons, the biology, the combat record, the zero casualty count. He wrote all of it in the plain, careful language he had used for 30 years of service, without exaggeration and without softening. He let the numbers say what the numbers said. The section on human stress biology took up 4 pages on its own. He had asked Churex to help him write it clearly, because he wanted the Council to understand it fully and not skim past it. The point, he wrote, was not simply that humans became faster and more capable under pressure. The point was that this made them fundamentally different from every other species the Coalition had ever encountered. Every other known race, including all 6 Coalition members, slowed down when threatened. Caution was the universal survival mechanism. For humans, pressure was fuel. They had evolved, over hundreds of thousands of years on a planet that apparently tried very hard to kill everything living on it, to respond to danger by becoming more dangerous themselves. He noted that this was not a trained behavior. It was biological. It was in their chemistry. The section on the combat record was shorter but harder to read. He wrote the numbers plainly: 11 engagements, 23 vessels destroyed, 0 crew lost, for years of service. Then he added one sentence beneath those numbers that said, by Velhari standards, a commander who achieved this record would be considered one of the finest officers produced by the fleet in a generation. Leon Drake described his current deployment as having been quieter than some. The final section of the report was the one Voreth had spent the most time writing. He had started it 4 different ways and deleted 3 of them. He wanted to say something that was accurate without being the kind of thing that caused people to make bad decisions out of fear. In the end, he had written it simply and directly, because he had found that simple and direct was usually the most honest. He wrote that the most unsettling thing about the encounter was not the weapons, the hull, or the biology. It was the attitude. He wrote that the Iron Resolve had crossed into Coalition space by accident, because a 26-year-old navigation officer from a city called Portland had forgotten to update a flight path file. A paperwork error. The captain had apologized for this the way a person apologizes for accidentally stepping into someone's yard. He had not been embarrassed by the ship's capabilities. He had not been cautious or guarded about what the scan might have found. He had not seemed to think that any of it required caution. He wrote that humans appeared to have no clear sense of how they looked from the outside. They built ships that could absorb hits meant for capital destroyers and filed them under routine patrol inventory. They sent crews into 11 armed engagements over 4 years and considered it a fairly ordinary tour. They offered to help a coalition vessel they had just met, on their way out of a border crossing they had drifted into by mistake, as casually as if they were asking if anyone needed directions. The final line of the report read, "The most dangerous thing about humanity is not their weapons, their endurance, or their biology. It is that they appear to have no idea how dangerous they are. And they are expanding. The council chamber was silent for almost 2 minutes after the final line was read aloud. The council's senior secretary later wrote in her private notes that it was the longest unbroken silence she had witnessed in 30 years of chamber service. Not the silence of confusion. The silence of a room full of very intelligent people sitting very still and thinking the same thought at the same time and not yet being ready to say it out loud. Eventually, the session chair cleared his throat and moved on to the next item on the agenda. But no one in that room was really listening to the next item. They were still thinking about a zero at the bottom of a casualty list, and a man drinking coffee on a meal break, and a ship that had offered to help on its way out the door. Across the border, in human space, Captain Leon Drake of the Iron Resolve was at his desk reviewing the corrected patrol route that Kevin Shaw had filed before the shift change. He approved it, added a note of acknowledgement in the crew log, and poured himself another cup of coffee. The tour had 11 days left. He was thinking about getting home in time for the weekend. He did not think about the coalition ship at all. It had been a routine encounter. A polite conversation. Nothing worth writing home about. Out in the dark, the Iron Resolve moved steadily through the stars, its running lights blinking at even intervals, calm and quiet and entirely at ease. And somewhere far behind it, a coalition high council chamber was slowly, carefully, beginning to decide what you were supposed to do about a neighbor like that.